he asked for? How come you're being so mean to her in class? So she's speaking as an advocate for Lily. Well, what the National Negro Congress did is they spoke as an advocate in the best interests of blacks concerning discrimination. They were the organization that went out and said, hey, how come our local lumber yard's not hiring black people, even though they're more qualified and harder workers than white people? They were advocates for Negroes and discrimination against them. Does that make sense? That was one of the first organizations that was established to advocate for the best interest of black Americans concerning discrimination. Again, that was the National Negro Congress in 1935. Now, by the mid-30s, because of organizations like the National Negro Congress and those black leaders that are standing up and saying, hey, don't buy where you can't work, guess who starts to get pressure to involve prominent Negroes in his presidential administration? Roosevelt. So he's not only getting pressure from people like the National Negro Congress and these black leaders promoting don't buy where you can't work, but there's somebody else poking him in the side saying, hey man, get going here. You got to start involving these prominent blacks in your administration. They got to have some say. Who was poking him in the side all the time trying to get him to do that? His wife Eleanor. Very good. His wife Eleanor. And she was saying, you know, honey, it's time you step up to the plate and figure out what's going on with these Negroes. Okay, you need to get their opinion, get them involved. Is he going to put a Negro in his cabinet in 1935? There is no way that is happening. But he listens to her, and he establishes an informal group of black advisors that he has come to the White House on occasion and meet with him. And he refers to those advisors as his black cabinet, which probably wouldn't be kosher today, but the president would meet with these informal advisors at the White House, and they became known as his black cabinet. Now, probably the most influential member of President Roosevelt's black cabinet was Mary Mcleod Bethune. Mary Mcleod Bethune. Very, very instrumental. Not only for black rights, but for women's rights as well. We'll talk about that. So one of the more influential members of President Roosevelt's black cabinet was a woman, Mary Mcleod Bethune. I'll tell you a little bit about her. Interesting lady. She's a very extraordinary educator. And she really was the women's first civil rights leader in a lot of ways. So she was an extraordinary educator. She became the first woman civil rights leader to a point. Because she was so involved in politics, she was a political activist and actually founded an organization called the National Council of Negro Women. So again, Mary Mcleod Bethune was a very extraordinary educator. She was the first women's rights, civil rights leader. She was a political activist. She founded the National Council of Negro Women. She was also the first African-American woman to be involved in any White House discussions, and later went on to serve 4 presidents. Served 4 presidents, 3 after Franklin Roosevelt. So she was very well respected. Her opinions were very well met, and she ended up serving as an advisor to 4 American presidents.
Did she serve all 4 terms of Roosevelt?
She served throughout that, yep. Now, in 1943, she even founded her own college, which at the time was called Bethune-Cookman College. Bethune-Cookman College, C-O-O-K-M-A-N. She founded that college in 1943, Bethune-Cookman College. Today, it's known as Bethune-Cookman University because it's gotten bigger. It is a private, co-ed, historically black college. Does that mean whites can't go to it? No, but historically black college. Kind of like Georgetown University outside Washington, D.C. It's a historically black college. There obviously are white students that go there, and more as time has came on. But it's now known as Bethune-Cookman University. It's a private, co-ed, historically black college. Anybody know where it's located? Daytona Beach, Florida. Daytona Beach, Florida. Now, to give you an idea of how popular Mary Mcleod Bethune became, in 1974, they erected a statue of her in Lincoln Park, outside the Capitol in Washington, D.C., which you'll get a chance to see next year. And you know, they don't erect a lot of statues of people in Washington, D.C. unless you're pretty well thought of. And most of the people that have a statue are what? White, presidents, male, all those types of things. But here is a picture of the Mary Mcleod Bethune statue that sits in Lincoln Park, which is about, I don't know, half a mile from the Capitol. And we'll get a chance to go see that when we're in D.C. I think it's noteworthy, certainly. And that statue was erected in 1974. Okay, any questions so far? We're moving and grooving. I'm feeling good about myself, and we're going to move on to New Deal measures to help farmers in America. We're going to get into some banking talk, so maybe McHenry can help me out if I say something that's not correct. Now, farmers were in trouble after the Great Depression and during. And when Roosevelt became president, 40% of American farms were mortgaged. 40% of American farms were mortgaged. Now, what does that mean if it's mortgaged, Leighton? Does your mother have a mortgage?
Yeah.
You have to pay for, yeah, you borrow money to buy a house. That's a mortgage. And in today's world, banks will sometimes lend you the money, like Pinnacle Bank might lend you the money, or they may sell that loan to some other mortgage company that then runs it. You know what I mean? So Gil McHenry would say, yeah, we'll finance your house, Mr. Durr. We're going to give you an interest rate of 4.5%. And then he sells that to another mortgage company, and they're the ones that run the show, and he gets paid probably a cut of that for doing that, right? Or the bank can. Well, I have a mortgage payment. Now, I did things a little bit different. When we bought our house in Moreland, I put some money down, which you usually have to put 10% down, maybe 20, depending on your credit rating, and then you pay the rest. And you can go over a certain number of years. Most people seem to take a mortgage over 30 years. I'm not sure it's the best thing, but it's maybe the most affordable, which we'll talk about in a minute. So within my payment, I have a 15-year mortgage, not anymore, but I did. So I see I've been here 10 years, so ooh, I'm getting close, right? And in my payment that I make of $1,600 every month, part of the money goes to this, part of the money goes to that, and part of the money goes to this. What's part of the money go to?
Yeah.
Electric.
No, that's extra. And your payment.
Like the bank?
Okay, so I know, but what do you pay in the bank? The bank lending that money for nothing?
Interest.
Okay, part of that goes to interest, part of that goes to what we call principal, which is the knockoff of your balance, and part of it goes to taxes. We have to pay taxes that, you know, my house has taxes. They usually throw that in your payment. If you're payment free, then you just pay taxes separately. But normally they estimate your taxes as so much a year and they throw that in your monthly payment. Now, if you're borrowing something at 30 years, let's say I'm borrowing $300,000 over 30 years, I make my first payment of $1,600. What percent of that do you think goes to principal? In other words, knocking off the loan. Not very much. What's most of it go to? Interest. Because as you pay the loan down, you pay less interest. Because the bank or the mortgage company wants to be making money. They're not going to do it the opposite way. Because all of a sudden, if you quit making your payment, they haven't made any money. So as you pay your loan down, more goes to principal, less goes to interest. As you start out, more goes to interest, less goes to principal. Okay? Now, what happened back in these farming days, now that we understand that these farmers had taxes, they had interest payments, they had principals on their loans. Well, the Great Depression came, and guess what happened? They quit making their payments. Quit making money, but quit making their payments. Now, if you're unable to pay off your mortgage, what happens, Kyra? Right, either the bank takes your place back and resells it, or the mortgage company that lends you the money takes it. And they're not very nice. You could make your payment every month for 10 years, and if you miss 3 in a row, your 11th year, they don't have any trouble yanking the carpet out from under you, really. Well, these farmers were having trouble. They were unable to pay their debts, and so they watched their farms taken over by the banks and the private mortgage holders, and their plan then was to sell that property to try to get their money back. But you can't blame them, right? So, if they take away Joe Keller's farm because he didn't pay his mortgage, he's not only jobless, he's homeless. He's got nothing. And so Roosevelt's got to step in here with the federal government and try to find a way to relieve these farmers, because if we don't have farmers, we don't produce, and if we don't produce, we don't feed our country, and if we don't feed our country, we have to export it from foreign countries, and they can rob us because it's all supply and demand, and we have no supply, so we're in demand. So Roosevelt's thinking, man, I got to get this figured out. So here's what he does. He talks the federal government into making Julie a loan at a low interest rate because she's lost her farm, but the bank hasn't sold it yet, so she still has time to maybe get it back if she starts making her payments due. So what the federal government does is they lend money to farmers. Now farmers can do two things with this money. First of all, if Julie has put all of her money into making the payment, and the farm's gone kind of downhill because she hasn't been able to buy the seed she needs, or the fertilizer, or the equipment to farm, or whatever, her farm's in bad shape and not producing, but she hasn't lost it yet, right? So she could borrow this money from the government and buy those types of things to get rolling again. Or a farmer could borrow the money and pay off the bank or pay off the mortgage company and then pay the government back instead of the bank or the mortgage company. And what's the government offering? Lower interest rates. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I want you to think about this. Kind of write it down. Okay? Aaron Vigil's a farmer. He owes $100,000 on his farm. And he can't pay it. And they're coming to get him, baby. If they haven't already started foreclosure proceedings, they're gonna. And he owes $100,000. And when he borrowed that money from the bank, they gave him 20 years to pay it back at 5% interest. He can't hack it. Cannot do it. Cannot do it. Take 100,000 divided by 20. What do we get?
5,000.
Okay, so he's got to pay 5,000 a year. He can't do it. And the interest on top of it. So the government comes in and says, well, I'll tell you what, Aaron, I'll loan you that $100,000 that you owe the bank. So Aaron takes that $100,000 and he gives it to the bank, and he's got his farm back. Now he's paying back the government over 50 years at 2.5% interest. Can he make that payment? So what's 100,000 divided by 50? Okay, lot different. Yeah, 2,000. That's what they did. So the government said, you know, Aaron, I'm going to give you that money. Now, they had to get going. They borrowed it and they had to get rolling. But if they paid off the farm and could start farming again and making a living, could they make that payment? Sure they could, but they couldn't make the other one. You get deeper and deeper and deeper. Sometimes, kids, it takes money to make money. And that money that was given by the government paid off that loan and got them a fresh start in which they could afford to buy their seed and their fertilizer because they weren't making that payment. They were making a payment that was less than half as much, right? And they could do it, yeah.
What if it died?
What if who died?
The farmers died. And
Well, that's not a
they're
bad...
30 years in.
That's not a bad question, because usually in this world you have your children, or like when I borrow money, I put a little life insurance disclosure in there and I pay a little extra on that loan a month. So if I die, what happens to that loan? It's paid off. I don't have to worry about it. Okay? And that would be, I think that if you buy something big, that would be smart to do, especially at my age, right? I mean, seriously, maybe when you're 23 would do that. You know, I'll tell you a story, and I found this out. A good friend of mine lost his wife, like in 3 months of cancer. She had a very good job. Very good job. He's now forced to sell the house. Why? Her income's not coming in. He can't afford the house. What didn't he have? Life insurance. You know, you never think that's going to be you, right? But it makes a difference. And so this was a really good deal. Now these programs for the farmers were administered by the Farm Credit Administration. Farm Credit Administration. That is the organization that was established in 1933 to help these farmers out of the fix they were in. This was brilliant strategy by President Roosevelt. Brilliant, because if farmers are producing, your economy is good. If farmers aren't producing, your economy is bad. And so we'll go from there. Now, tomorrow we'll hit the next problem, and that's the banking crisis. Remember all the banks that closed up? What's Roosevelt going to do to get banks on sound footing so people trust putting their money in there? You know what people are doing right now with their money? They're putting it in cans and burying it in their yards. I'm not kidding. I'll tell you a story about my mom too. My mom grew up during this time. When I was a little kid, my mom had $2,000 or $3,000 wrapped up in tin foil in our freezer, because she just had to have a little seed money in case the banks went bad. Because what did her family go through? The Great Depression. It's amazing, yeah. Okay, kiddos, good job. We'll continue with that tomorrow. I think our schedule is pretty much set.